Hi.
How are you?
Hi, Sarah.
Doing great.
Good. Go ahead with your question.
Yes, I have a friend that's in trouble. He couldn't make his rent.
Okay.
And I told him that the landlord has to file something with the courthouse before she could make him leave.
Okay.
He
Eviction.
has nowhere to go, and he couldn't pay his rent.
Okay.
He was waiting on a check, and I said I thought he had at least 60 days
Okay.
before he had to leave.
Proper procedure, Renee?
Renee, what does the landlord have to do before they can ask somebody to leave for not paying rent?
Well, first the landlord should give the tenant 30 days notice that the rent is late, how much is due, and by what date that rent should be paid. If the rent is not paid by that date, the landlord should go ahead and file the eviction notice with the court. And that is usually about 30 days. Now, that will come up in the court's calendar rather quickly. Once that tenant does receive the dispossessory notice, then they will have an opportunity to answer. And the court will give them 7 days to answer.
Okay. And when does the authorities take over, Renee? Because I saw a very sad case of, economic times, things are happening. And actually, someone in the townhome down from me, I came home and all of their belongings were on the street. So I wasn't sure, had this gone on for 3-4 months? So I didn't know the length of time that you had or what was going on, if they just didn't give them anything or didn't notify them. So I didn't know what the procedure was and when the authorities actually have to come in.
That's a very good question, because after that tenant answers, which I would actually tell the tenant the most important thing that they do is actually answer that petition when they receive it. Once they have answered, the court will set a hearing date. And after that hearing, during the hearing, the court will determine whether or not that tenant is in breach for not paying the rent, which is the basic responsibility of a tenant. And the court will then give the landlord the right to dispossess the tenant and give that tenant about 7 days. Unless there are some extenuating circumstances, 7 days will be the time that the tenant will have before they're...
What if there's some sort of history between the tenant and the landlord? Say that he's always late with his payment, or he gets behind, and the landlord lets him pay twice one month and not the next month, or has some sort of irregular payment schedule. Can that landlord then insist on strict compliance with the lease?
The landlord will have to make a decision, because if the landlord has been known to take partial payments, or maybe the landlord took half of the rent 1 month and then the tenant thought they could continue in that practice of irregular payments, the landlord should stop taking that rental payment, because the tenant cannot be dispossessed unless the rent is actually due, if the landlord is trying to dispossess that tenant for rent.
Opinions expressed on Law Call are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of 13 WMAZ staff or management, nor any legal or judicial entity. The legal information supplied in this broadcast is general information only and is not intended to be legal advice for any given situation. Do not rely on broadcast information without consulting an attorney. Contingent attorney's fees refers only to those fees charged by the attorneys for legal services. Such fees are not permitted in all types of cases. Court costs and other additional expenses of legal action usually must be paid by the client.